Oh, hello. Seriously guys, this magic pencil makes inks reproduce more than gremlins. I have no idea why. Does save money on my wallet though. But either way, I'll do another Dr. P.H. Martin ink review. I'm sure that's what my fans are demanding. I need to go this way because the camera is in the way. What's up YouTube, I'm J-Rod of BLACKEST, and today we are taking a look at the Dr. P.H. Martin's Ocean 3E Dark Matter Black Fountain Pen Ink. And oh boy, these inks are starting to become an even bigger mouthful to say. Now this ink has the distinction of being the most expensive Dr. P.H. Martin's ink I have purchased for review. In fact, this almost had the distinction of being the most expensive ink I've ever reviewed. I ended up paying about $11.99 for this ink way back when it was available at Michael's on a discount. But believe it or not, I have seen this thing sell for as low as $7.99 all the way up to as high as, and I kid you not, I am not stuttering, $29.99. That's a lot of money for 1 ounce of ink. Now this is Dr. P.H. Martin's, which we have done quite a few tests in the past, and I have to say that despite the shakiness of some of their products and really the more expertise they have with their array of inks, where it's really good with a dip pen but horrible with a brush pen, but this one's really good with a brush but horrible with a dip pen, I have to say that I do enjoy a lot of what they make, and I really do like reviewing their products. But this is just kind of your standard inkwell that you get with them. Is a glass bottle, of course, with an eyedropper, something you do want with the way this inkwell is designed. Very simple design. You got the ocean. I do like the fact that you get like kind of like a ports window here. It says it's for fountain pens. We're going to be testing it with the dip pen because I don't have a fountain pen, and I'm not going to drop like 20 bucks on a fountain pen just for one review. I'm only willing to drop $11.99 on an inkwell for a review. Wait a minute. Closer look at the ink. You can see that we do have some text here, just basically saying like, hey, this is really good, it's really awesome, but it doesn't work for all fountain pens. So now we take a look at the bottle. Let's go ahead and take a look at it in the Batman sketchbook. The eyedropper's defective. Well, good thing I didn't pay $30 for that. Let's do our first test with our dip pen. Getting a good dip, and let's see. Oh, very smooth. One thing I'm thinking is that this ink, because it's really meant for a fountain pen, I don't think it's going to be grabbing our nib as well as other inks, a little more liquidy. And I think that's apparent with how our lines are much shorter than what we're used to getting with normal inks. So that's pretty interesting. Makes sense. And it is a very smooth ink. I like the shade of black. Let's try it with our quill nib. I'm really curious to see how that's going to work. Probably again going to run into the issue of it's really not going to be grabbing. You have to make a lot more dips. Maybe it won't work. Oh, hey, it does. Okay. It just took a little bit more. So, yeah. Really curious to see how this is actually going to work with our brush. I'm really curious to see how this is going to work with ink washes. On top of that, I'm curious. I'm assuming this ink is waterproof because, guess what? It doesn't advertise that it's not waterproof on the packaging. So, we'll give that a test as well. And that will heavily inform how we do our illustration because waterproof and non-waterproof inks, you got to approach them very differently. So, let's grab a brush. Oh. Ooh, I like that. That is very smooth with the brush. Very, very smooth. I like that. This is meant for a fountain pen, but still is a good surprise that it works so well. It does seem like this will be an ink that takes a while to dry, and I'm noticing as I try to thin and stretch it out, still hasn't really dried that much. You kind of get a feel for how long an ink will take to dry, really taking your time doing this. So I do think that this will be an ink where drying time is going to be a major factor in how long your illustration will take. I know I like to do most of my line work with my dip pen before going in with a brush, so that's going to be something I have to think about here. If I run my brush by, yeah, definitely going to take time to dry. So I'm really curious to see if this is waterproof. Again, it didn't mention it on the packaging, so we're going to clean our tools and go in with a basic test. Here is our ink wash. As you can see with our little thing of water, is quite ink filled. So let's go ahead and test it here. Going down smooth, pretty nice. I'm doing a light ink wash because this is a good way to tell really how your inks are going to be washing. But here you can see that we get some good textures. There's really no streaking, and you can really control and layer it, which is pretty interesting. So let's do another dip. So there you go, you can try and layer it. Obviously you probably would mix in more ink to it to help with that effect, but this is just kind of doing like a little cheap one, a little easy one. Let's see if this ink is waterproof. Now I did not give it time to dry, obviously we're still in the same cut, but I'm really curious to see just with it mostly dry, because you can tell a non-waterproof ink from a waterproof ink really quickly, and this is how. That's not waterproof at all. Yeah, it's just the water is just rehydrating all of this. And again, it's not just the fact that I'm using more inked water. It's the same water that we did our normal ink wash in. In fact, if you grab it here, you can see that it still has the black from this that I picked up. But if we clean it and then we dry it off a little bit and dip it again, it's the same ink wash as here. But as soon as I pick this up here, I'm rehydrating that ink and I'm adding it to my brush. And that makes this medium ink wash. But I think we got a good idea over everything from our test. We learned that it doesn't hug the nibs well, it's not waterproof, so what we're going to do now is move on to the illustration. Alright guys, so after getting a good idea of what this ink is capable of, I thought of the perfect illustration. It's one of Wrath, where I actually originally designed this to just be in black and white, no complex ink washes, no ink washes at all. It's going to be a very fun, very simple illustration, and of course we'll be using our traditional tools, the brush, the other brush, the dip pen, and the quill pen. Because yes, we do things traditionally here on BATTLEBRAWLER Productions. So let's go ahead and roll that super time-lapse footage and get into the illustration. Inking this piece was an interesting but fun challenge. I actually penciled this piece about a month ago during my intense study of bat anatomy, as I wanted to learn how to draw bat wings more dynamic, more realistic, and more detailed. So I've been studying them recently, and when I did this piece, it was during that study. So there was challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 was this ink takes forever to dry, and I mean forever. So it meant that all my line work had to be very precise and very careful. I really worked hard not to smudge it, and I smudged it pretty bad too if you look at the top. But I knew that I could fix that in the end. So I kept working at it, and after I did all my line work, I waited 30 minutes for it to dry, and it was still wet. It was really annoying and led to more annoying smudges. But since I knew I wasn't going to be doing an ink wash with this piece, I decided it's okay, I can fix it later. After I did all my brushes, I ended up using quite a few. I used a small one for finer detail. I used one of my favorite brushes of all time to actually do some of the fine/big detail, and to just kind of help speed things along, I ended up using my normal cheap Dollar Tree chisel brush to finish everything up. However, when it came to fixing my mistakes, that's where I ran into a huge problem. I mentioned how this ink isn't waterproof, and if you use a really wet or runny white ink, it's actually going to rehydrate that ink, and they're going to mix and create an area of gray, which if you're not wanting to do that in your art, yeah, that's not good, and that was a not fun surprise. It was very annoying. In fact, the Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white ink rehydrated this ink so much I actually had to switch to a different white ink. I ended up using the Presto Jumbo correction pen by Penn & Teller to finish off all my corrections because it surprisingly didn't rehydrate the ink, and I'm not sure why that is the case. Overall, this was a fun challenge that I feel like would have been easier if I used some type of technical pen or a fountain pen instead of the dip pen, and then stick to the normal brush techniques that I use. But now that we're done, let's take a look at it all finished up. And we're done, guys. I absolutely love how this piece came out. I penciled it about a month ago, and it's awesome seeing it inked and come to life. And I have to say that easily, this is in my top 5 favorite pieces we've inked this year. It's super fun and enjoyable. And as always, it is available on my ArtStation account for a $1 digital download. It's that first link in the description down below. You can get a digital copy of all of the art that we make on the channel. It really does help us out. And on top of that, you can get an awesome desktop background. So go ahead and hit that link in the description. But putting my self-promo to the side, let's talk about the ink itself and when it came to the illustration. Kind of two minds on this ink. First off, most of the time when you see fountain pen ink on any type of ink, you can actually use this with the dip pen. But I find that Dr. P.H. Martin really did engineer this ink to really work only with a fountain pen. And that's because the ink did have trouble being controlled with a nib. The ink had trouble flowing off the nib as they really didn't hug it. It was very liquidy. And it was also somewhat difficult to control with a brush. Not impossible, just more difficult than normal. I think if I actually did an illustration, not in my traditional comic book way, but instead did a technical drawing. If I brought out a technical pen or a fountain pen, filled it with this ink, and just did such as like a robot design or design a building or say something like that, I think this ink would really excel and work better than it did here, because a lot of those problems would go away. The fact that it isn't waterproof, I also think supports that. Now, interestingly, I did find that when I was correcting problems that I did have with this ink, I did use the Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white ink, which is one of my favorite white inks of all time, and it actually reactivated a lot of the ink, turning it gray, which was really weird, so I had to go over it again. In fact, it actually worked far better with the Penn & Teller Presto Jumbo correction pen, so I thought that was really interesting, as this reactivated it, but this didn't. So if I was to actually rate this on my scale of 1 to 10, and keep in mind, I have to take consideration how it works with the brush, how it works with a pen, its intended use, and on top of that, the price and how much you get, so there's a lot of factors that go into my rating system. If I was to rate it how I actually used it right now, I would rate it as a 4 on my scale of 1 to 10, as it's not the best, but it certainly is pretty good, and if you can get it at a decent price, you can make good art with it, but in my opinion, it gets an 8 out of 10 if you use it for its intended use. use if you actually did technical drawing, if you actually used it for its intended purpose. I know, shocking to actually do that with an ink, kind of shocking that we're acknowledging it on this channel where we tend to not do that. This would get a much higher rating. But of course we're testing it in the traditional sense that we do things here. 4 out of 10 on what we did here, because there are far better options at a much more affordable price, and Dr. P. Martin's has way better options. And if you'd actually use it intended with technical drawing, gets an 8 out of 10. It does get an 8 because of its fluctuating price, which makes it difficult to actually assess it properly, because if you get this thing for really cheap, it's definitely worth it. But if you have to pay $30 for this, I'm sorry, it's not worth it. But that's my opinion on the Dr. P.H. Martin's Ocean 3E Dark Matter Black Fountain Pen Ink. But let me know what you guys think of this illustration and the ink itself. Do you like what I did? Do you like the ink? Do you think it's phenomenal? Have you actually used it for its intended purpose? I'm really curious, and we may revisit this if I start getting some more technical pens, because I have found it very difficult to actually find good technical pens. So as soon as I get one, we'll retest it. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Subscribe to the channel for more art and animation based content, and I'm J-Rod of BLACKEST. I draw power and my own soul.